Okay. Ready? For this segment, we're going to cover the basics of tenderloin butchery. So this is what's considered a 5 and up tenderloin. This we received with the chain, so I'm going to show you how to remove the chain, how to clean the chain for usable product, and then also how to remove all the silver skin and some basic portioning techniques for this tenderloin. So the first thing you would need to do is, not even using your knife, you can actually just get in there and kind of pull away any material that's not really attached. Now what I like to do is, and again using my fingers, I'm not even using the knife, we're going to kind of open up this area between the tenderloin and the chain. It's a very natural break, you won't have any problem finding it. When you do meet with a little bit of resistance, you can just kind of cut the membrane away a little bit, free it up with your hands a little bit more, and then again come in with the tip of your knife to kind of open that up. So the idea here is we want to expose the chain in its entirety. Now I'm going to go ahead and employ the knife, and I'm going to kind of work the chain away, and I'm using the tip of my knife to make sure that I am cutting in between the chain and the tenderloin. When you get up into the top, now we've started working into the head of the tenderloin. So there is a nice piece of meat that actually runs down into the chain in this section. So what I like to do is just do some gentle exploring. Put a little bit of weight on the chain so that you can see that you're not cutting into that muscle, and then just kind of pull it away. There we go. So that is a removed chain. And we'll revisit that in just 1 second. So now we've isolated the tenderloin, we've removed the chain, and now we're really going to want to get in there and kind of pull off some of this excess membrane. And you can achieve a lot of this with your fingers. That way you're not going to accidentally cut into the tenderloin, sacrificing or compromising any of the steaks that you might cut off of this. So really what we want to do is really expose this top layer of silver skin, because that's going to be our next step of removal. So once we've exposed that, we're going to kind of trace along, following that silver skin, again with the tip of our knife, just to open this up and really make it a little bit more visible. Okay. So see how I've split that head, but I've made very few and very shallow cuts into the actual tenderloin. Really, we've just been working with extra fat and connective tissues. So down here, this silver skin gets quite thick, which is perfect because we can cut underneath of it, free it up a little bit, and then that's going to give us a great handle to hang on to as we remove the rest of the silver skin from the top of the tenderloin. So now we're going to grab that silver skin that we loosened up. We're going to put our knife at an angle that's towards the silver skin. We're going to put a little bit of resistance on that, and then we're just going to slowly, carefully remove that silver skin, trying to leave as little tenderloin on the silver skin as possible. Again, you come in just barely under that membrane. The membrane is, or the silver skin rather, is very strong. So it'll kind of hold your knife where you want it. Again, we're going to work all the way around. Free up that nice thick piece, and then put some tension on it, and then slowly work your knife under it, removing that silver skin. So we want to get as much of this off as we can. Just know that some of it does run into the interior of the meat right around here, and we can leave a little bit of that on there. Once it gets kind of thin, it's not as big of a concern as the super thick, chewy stuff up at the top. So at this point, we've pretty much removed all of that silver skin and all that connective tissue from the top. We've got a nice clean top. And now we can address any extra fat or connective tissue that's still on the head of the tenderloin. And again, I'm just kind of stretching it out a little bit to where my knife can get under the connective tissue and easily remove it without cutting into the tinder. Just do a little more tune up here and there. A little bit of excess fat on the sides is okay, but we do want to shave down a little bit just so it's nice and even. And flip it over, remove any excess fat that's just kind of hanging off of there. I like to leave most of this intact. Most of this is quite tender and will cook down. So the other last thing is there's a nice piece of fat that runs on the underside of the tenderloin and it runs into the head, and you can kind of just cut that out at an angle and it removes quite nicely. And then our final piece of silver skin rests on the back. And using the same technique, we free up the thick part and use it as a handle to remove the rest of the stuff. Again, just a little detail work to make it nice and pretty. And here we have our cleaned tenderloin. Now, as far as portioning steaks out of this, on the ends here, we have what are called tournedos. So you're only going to get 1 or 2 per tenderloin. They usually come in at about 3.5 ounces. These are used for a couple different styles of classical preparation, but those are the tournedo tips. Now we move into the center section of the tenderloin. If we were to roast this whole, we would call this the Chateaubriand. Otherwise, we can actually cut this down into various size steaks. You could get 6 inches off of this, or 6 ounce rather, 8 ounce, 10 ounce, up to 12 ounce, or you can just do the whole roast. So depending on what you need, you know, you can cut this accordingly. I would always recommend the use of a scale when portioning. These generally run up to a couple $100, and you need to make sure that you can get the most bang for your buck. So portioning the head, notice we have kind of 3 different muscle groups that come into here, but depending on how you cut these, you can actually get some really nice 4 to 6 ounce steaks out of these. So what I like to do with this big one here, you can actually kind of follow the contour of it and make kind of a shallow round cut, and then you can take these tips off, and now you have a nice kind of center cut section that you could get 1, if not 2, really nice 5 to 6 ounce steaks from. The same thing can be said down here. There's an opportunity to get 1 really nice steak out of the top of this head here. So again, we'll kind of cut around in a natural round. We'll trim it off a little bit. And then again, we get another really nice 5 to 6 ounce steak out of that center cut. So these pieces that are left down here, because they're not quite steak worthy, what we can do is cut these down into strips. We can, again, cut them crosswise so we get a nice large kind of dice. And then we can actually use these in, say, stir fry, or you could even use them in a fajitas. You can, put them on skewers and grill them as brochettes. But this is all very usable, very tender meat that can and should be used in another dish in the kitchen somewhere, because after all, we pay for our trim as well. So here we've got some nice tips, again, that we can do a multitude of things with. And we can also add those to the chain. So cleaning chains is kind of labor of love. It's one of the more pesky jobs in the kitchen, as it does take a little while, but there is a fair amount of usable meat on these. So really what I'm going to do is remove the really tough connective tissue. And I'm just going to take my time and identify where the nice patches of meat are. I'm going to remove any extra fat, and again, any extra connective tissue, until we meet, the center of that chain, which actually has some really nice meat in there, very nice marbling. It's got a nice high fat content, and the connective tissue within the chain is actually pretty supple. It's not terribly offensive. So these cleaning your chains are another great way to pull potentially another 8 to 12 ounces of usable product from that tenderloin. And we'll go down and continue just to kind of chip away at this and expose that usable meat. So in the end, we have our tournedos, a couple of nice petite fillets, we have our tenderloin tips, we have our chain tips, and we also have our Chateaubriand for a whole roast and or portioning. So again, this is a 5-pound beef tenderloin, cleaned and portioned for service.